Well, hey everyone, welcome to another midweek moment. I'm Jordan. This is Travis.
Nice to meet you guys.
We just like to take time every week and get on here and talk a little bit more, get into a deeper discussion about what we chatted about on Sunday on the previous message. So this last week, Travis talked about just the fact that God wants to use what's in our hand. He talked about Moses and how God used Moses, the man that he was, flaws and all, and just Moses' obedience with what he had in the moment, in what was in his hands, allowed God to do some incredible stuff through his life. And so, Travis, why don't you just kick us off with what does this topic stir up in you? What does it mean to you? And what are some things we can maybe, go a little deeper into this week?
Yeah, I think one thing that really stands out to me as I was even prepping the message was the reality of there have been moments kind of throughout my life where I've wondered, does God want to use me, or can God use me? And what I realize is this is really just a process of intentionality. It isn't about God being able to use us. God can use anything. And so it's about God wanting to use us. He wants access to our whole life. And so it's really not about a certain skill we possess or our talents or our giftings, though those are things that we do have in our hands to offer God. It's about us just offering our lives, our entire lives, and saying, God, you can use whatever I have. And so, for me, that's played out differently in different seasons of my life. For a long time, it was, when I was a young man, it was like, I don't think I have anything, so I'm just going to serve and I'm just going to be available. So it was my time. I offered my time to God. As I got older, there were some skills I could lead worship, but I wasn't very good at it. And so I would just say, I'm available. So I got to lead worship in some small groups and different things like that. And so really just over my life, it's looked differently in a lot of different ways. But it has been that intentional practice of just saying, God, whatever I have, I'm just going to submit it to you and say, would you use it? Would you, here it is. And so,
for me, I think about there's been many seasons of my life where I've had more in my hands than other seasons. But one of the things that comes to mind for me, whether it's been a lot that I feel like I've had to offer or very little, like you just said, God isn't, he doesn't have a lid on him based on what we have or don't have, and he's also not more powerful because we have more to give. He's not contained within our limits. But I would say one thing that has been kind of cool to look back over my life and see in other people's lives is the fact that God also, he doesn't just grab people and go like marionette style and force them to do things for him.
No.
And so even though some people may have many things to offer, God isn't going to use those things unless they're given to God. And that's like something that's been a challenge for me, that like, whether I feel like I have much or I have little, I can be useful to the kingdom. I can be used by God, not because of what I'm even giving, but the fact that I'm giving it. The fact that I'm giving it to God and saying, use this, he will use it. He uses what's given to him. And so that's been a challenge for me over the years, of just like looking back and realizing there were seasons with music where I remember when I was in high school, I loved playing guitar, and I started off playing guitar to impress girls, and that was why I did it. And it kind of worked, it kind of didn't. But in that same season, a little bit later,
it worked for me. I got
Travis
to play
got all the girls.
got all the girls, so I don't know what you're talking about.
I didn't have as much luck. So, but in that season, I had the same gifting I had as when I started to lead worship. It just wasn't being used by God. It wasn't being used for kingdom benefit or fruit, and there wasn't something eternal happening through it. And I think there's just such an invite to, like you mentioned, even calling it an invitation from God to allow what we have in our hands to be used for an eternal purpose and not just for, momentary gain.
That's good. I think a lot of the time this thought kept rolling through my head as I was kind of prepping this message, just this idea of obedience. And I think you know, a lot of the times we think of obedience and there's the conversation, grace versus works, and do we have to earn somehow? But the reality is obedience has more to do with us than it does what God's getting out of the equation. And so really it's about us actually stepping into this invitation that God's invited us into and experiencing more than we ever could experience without God. And so, you know, I've heard a lot of different statements about this, but when we exclude God from a part of our life, really the result is we only get out of that part of our life what we put into it. But when we include God in every part of our life, through obediently doing what he's asked us to do, then we get this kind of like God multiplication factor where we get what we've offered plus what God has to offer in return.
Right.
And he just expands it, and it's always more than what it ever could be.
I think it's kind of cool, like this topic, because if you look over the last, I don't know, 4 weeks or so that we've been in this whole series, this really is the heart behind the series. When you look at, we talked about finances at first.
Sure.
And we talked about the fact that when you give God, not just give to God financially, but when you literally, at the heart level, you give God your finances. You get God in your finances. When we talked about idol worship a couple weeks ago, and when we give God our idols and we're saying I'm giving you you get Him, and you get the protection from those things and the dark things that come from those. And even in this, I think in our giftings, in our skill sets, in our means, and the things we have, we get God in those things when we give those things to God. And that's just an exciting thought. And like, if you just look at the landscape of your life through that lens, not always easy to make that call and that decision, but it's just kind of an eye-opening thing. So
and I just love the way that God works is he uses the simple things to confound the wise. And he uses the ordinary people to do the extraordinary things, and it's just, God just does that over and over and over, and you see that all throughout the Bible, and I've definitely experienced that in my life. And so that's our encouragement to you too, is this week, as you're kind of thinking through what this week looks like, just know God wants to use you today. God wants to use you tomorrow. God wants to use you this week, and whatever that looks like, whatever you have to offer him, it's about just being intentional and saying, God, I just want to include you in this space and just give you what I have. And so that's my encouragement this week, is to do that. Invite God, as he's given you an invitation, invite God to be a part of your day.
Hey, this series has led us to some questions that I think are really powerful questions. And I think at the end of every message throughout the series, whether it was Travis or myself, we normally culminated it to this point of saying, like, what is the thing that we've been talking about in your life? And so last week, Travis posed the question, what's in your hand? And me and Shai, my wife, were talking about this today at lunch, just about what in our life, what are the things that are in our hands? Ask yourself that question this week. Pray that question. When you pray things like that, those are the kind of questions that it's just like, sometimes God answers us in mysterious ways. Those questions, he's gonna show you. And just be ready when he shows you to say, okay, this is what you've given me. This is what's in my hands. Open my eyes to these things. He's going to answer you. And man, there's a lot of blessing when we step into obedience that way. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. But as we do, just want to let you know, this week we're actually ending this series. We're going to be ending the Empowered series. We're talking about legacy. What does it mean to leave a legacy in our lifetime and beyond by being empowered, filled with the power of God through the way we live our life. So really excited about it. And
you don't want to miss it.
Well, hey, have a great week, guys. We'll see you next week.
See you good.